Hi, I'm Seamless, and I want to show you this little thing here to talk to you about what it means to actually use to make chords using analog stuff. I have a chord here. This is the chord I played. It has some 7s and 3s and whatever, and this is what it sounds like. I have a dry version and then a version. This is directly what came out of the analog stuff, and then this is just with some digital reverb. And I'm showing, this is really kind of simple stuff. You probably won't care, but there is some interesting aspects about how this works and what you would have to do to make this happen on non-analog stuff. So here this goes. Cool. So now, first of all, we know that there's 4 voices, so why are there 8 channels? 8 sounds, rather. And what this is a left and a right. So this is the first thing I want to talk about, multi-tracking. Beyond just making a chord, the reason why we're recording all this out is because analog stuff has recorded, but the reason why we're doing individual voices is because the synth is monophonic. I could have actually played a chord with this because I do have 3 individual oscillators. 2 on the DPO, and then 1 is just the Pittsburgh oscillator. What I'm doing now, however, is I'm playing all 3 of them at once to make essentially a supersaw, a very light supersaw, and then I'm making that one voice run through the filter pluck, which is happening inside the filter that I have. And that's just what the sound is. So we had to record a minimum of 4 times to make a mono sound. So stereo, I just recorded the same thing twice in a row, and then cut it, made it unique, and then panned it hard left and hard right. And the reason why this works is because of the inherent differentness of everything the analog does. But if you wanted to do this in real life, I just realized this is offset weird, but if you want to do this in real life, you could actually sort of mimic how this rolls. And this has to do with one fundamental aspect of analog stuff, which is that when you turn the thing on, it is constantly putting output. Some synths do have a sync function or a re-trigger function, which is handy for when you want to have more control of what the sound is. But unless you're doing that, when the second you turn it on, it's just running whatever waveforms. Actually, it's running all of the waveforms all at once. And when I'm playing saw waves, and actually got square waves in there too. Now, when I'm playing all these waveforms, this means that when I play the next note, it doesn't always start at the right phase. It doesn't start at the same phase at all, as a matter of fact. Now, and as a result, though, you know how when you start playing a supersaw, and it moves. That means that basically these are always moving in and out of like that Reese sort of pitchiness all the time, and it's never going to be the same thing at one moment from the other. That, as a result, means that if I just play the same thing twice, it's going to be different. And those differences are what allows me to pan them hard left and hard right, and for it to come out a balanced sound. This is exactly the same process that it has to do with when I record guitars for any kind of like rock or metal guitar tone. If I record the same part twice, just play it twice in a row, the subtle differences between how I pluck the string and the tone and all that stuff means that I can pan it hard left and hard right, and it'll work. It'll actually be a pretty balanced, even sound. There's also just the fact that the oscillators are never perfectly in tune anyway, no matter where you put them. There's a bit of drift involved. And so that means that the amount of things that can be different from one hit to the next is a lot. It's pretty astronomical. Right now, these are all pretty much in sync. You can see that when the filter hit lines up more or less perfectly, which is pretty cool. The signals are just just weird looking. The weird lookiness of the signal does not necessarily, I mean, it does play an important part when it comes to mixing it. Like, I am actually EQing it a little bit because the low end is just like, it's like a bass drum hit on all of those low notes. a literal bass drum hit. I mean, I still kind of do that anyway. So I do that for every single note, and it stacks up, and it does well. And as well, the interplay between the notes allows it to work. Because this is only a 3-voice supersaw, which if you've ever made supersaws, you know that's not really a lot. They are very close together, but because there's a big-ass chord, and I'm doing the stereo business, the interplay comes across as being pretty smooth. So how would you do this in the real world and with the fake world, actually, digital stuff? Well, all that I have said, which is the idea that it's always running and there's very like pitch differences over time, you can mimic that rather easily. Like you can write a line. You don't even need to do it individually. You can just take a regular chord. Like I did this voice out I pre-did it with Harmer. And so what I could do is that instead of doing individual notes like that, I could actually just have it go and then have the pattern play out with volume automation, which actually, if you think about it, is exactly how the modular stuff works. When we play a note and we hear the sound and it stops when we let go of the note, it's because there is a volume control that is reading a signal to say, okay, now it's on, now it's off, now it's on, now it's off. And that's just the volume control, but you're putting the analog, the generators into that control, and it is always putting out signal into that control. We're just essentially pulling down the fader and every note on and off kind of thing. So you'd have to think about that. And then it's just pretty easy to also just put like a really slow, really shallow LFO on pitch so that like every hit is different all the time forever. And that works out pretty cool. There's actually a function inside Serum to make the phases, basically have it run forever. And that's where you take the phase control and you turn it all the way up, and it says phase memory. This means that when you play a note, when you play the next note, the phase picks up where it left off. And if you just play consecutive notes like this, it actually sounds like one continuous note. Because the phase is perfectly interlocking with the next note, and that means that it comes across as one whole solid thing. And so if you combine that with the pitch modification that I talked about, you could basically completely perfectly replicate what's happening here. In terms of the general feel and the sound, you really would have a pretty hard time replicating the weird waveform aspect of this. And then there's also the sharpness aspect. The sharpness in the filter has to do with just pure perfectness when it comes to like engaging the envelope. And that isn't really a limitation in the digital world. In fact, the digital world is a little bit better about that. It's better to the point where most DAWs have built-in protections to prevent that from happening. The perfectness, because it's just too sharp and it snaps in a way that people think is unpleasant. So DAWs have built-in protections. So if you wanna mimic this behavior on a filter, for example, you'd have to do it on a filter in a way that does not have smoothing enabled, or at least it has it disabled in such a way that you have control over it. For example, inside Harmer, if I want to make it sharper, there's this ramping thing that's on by default in the advanced tab, which actually is a little bit of a smoothing on every single note. And then if I turn it off, I have like a huge, even when it's quiet, you can hear that's real snappy. It's a lot snappier than it was a second ago. And there's also the envelope granularity for when there is actual movement. And that's another thing, is that in the digital world, there's resolution when it comes to having automation. When you have a control that generates an envelope that has motion, is that motion is governed by the resolution of your DAW. And that resolution is usually, in the NFL anyway, this is handled by the time base, the PPQ, which I have right now, that's maximum level of 960, which I don't know how that stacks up to other DAWs, but that's that. But in the analog world, you put out a signal, and that signal is just that signal. There's not like a resolution involved. It's just what that is. I'm not going to turn that into a whole sampling versus analog business, because there's a huge amount of misinformation about that. I ain't getting into it. Largely, just don't worry about it. But that's another thing that combines with this kind of sound to create that kick drummy behavior that's in that filter. And the other part about this is the filter itself. The filter I'm using is not the world's most wonderful filter, which is actually contributing to the way that the tone is being handled. Its weird jankiness is coming across and influencing the tone in a way that creates just the end result that we hear. which is not to say that you couldn't do that with a regular filter. You just have to intentionally make it janky, because digital stuff is usually pretty ridiculously precise in comparison to analog hardware, which is the whole point, I guess. This seemed like a pretty basic thing to do just to see what it was like, and I wanted to know what would happen. I actually don't think I would ever do this in a song. I don't think I would ever make, unless I was like challenging myself to make a song entirely out of analog stuff, which I might do just for fun. This is just to acclimate myself to working with the stuff. But insofar as actually making this sort of sound, like a big old saw thing, I would just do that digitally, because the sound difference is negligible, and it is infinitely easier to do with digital stuff, which is going to be the case for almost every single thing anyone ever does with any of this, analog or digital, is that it will always be easier with digital, and you will always have more options, and chances are it'll be quote unquote better, depending on what you want to do. But that's not why we got it. That's not why people get this stuff. I mean, if it were, it'd be a lot more popular, wouldn't it? Yeah. So I just thought that was interesting. If you want to look at this file, there's a SoundCloud link in the description of this video where you can download it, and this thing with reverb and without reverb, in case you want to have it in a thing. If you're curious about the progression, this is the progression. Anyway, if you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.